Cyberpunk 2077 finally released after over 7 years in development. And the obvious needs to be said first. On release, this game did not run on the consoles it was advertised for. The game was even pulled off of the PlayStation Store, and CD Projekt Red is facing a lawsuit for false advertisement. This is not surprising practice coming from a large game studio. AAA games are commonly above average in quality, but riddled with controversies and malpractice, and the current state of mainstream game releases really needs to change. But I'll leave further commentary on that issue to other voices. I'm here to discuss the quality of the product that was released. Cyberpunk 2077, as riddled with controversies and bugs as it may be, is still a final product that we can now examine. Cyberpunk 2077 is three things. 1. A video game. 2. An open world video game. And 3. A piece of cyberpunk media. Because of this, it should be analyzed in light of all video game design past and present, as well as all open world style games like GTA, Assassin's Creed, Breath of the Wild, and it should be compared with other pieces of cyberpunk media. 2077 is an exceptional entry into the cyberpunk genre, an average open world game, and a boring video game in general. The gameplay in 2077 is average at best. Many parts are either flat out bad or have elements that just don't make any sense with other design decisions in the game. This game is a first-person shooter with melee options. On top of the gunplay is quick hacking and exploring the world through driving. You can level up your character to gain skills in 5 different skill trees. Lastly, you can find different vendors around the city that will sell guns, upgrade components, food, and clothing. The gunplay is quite boring after not too long. I played for over 70 hours, which is way too long, and I switched to using melee weapons only after about 15 hours. The shooting just isn't enjoyable. You end up picking up a gun, using it for 10 minutes, killing an enemy, and then picking up their gun because it does just a little bit more damage. The assault rifles, shotguns, pistols, and snipers don't have any real advantages over the others, except that the snipers do let you stay out of range when there are too many enemies. But playing like this is kind of boring. All you have to do is stay behind cover and reload. There's no real challenge. Even if you do end up getting into close quarters with enemies, there's still no challenge. You just use bats or knives, and they're strong enough to kill any enemy with just a few hits. The gunplay doesn't only lack challenge, it also lacks depth. You can find a few upgrades to put on your gun, and they allow you to charge shots, bounce bullets off of walls, or the best, upgrade to aimbot. And when you get an aimbot, every hit becomes a headshot. So now you, the player, just have to aim and shoot. Game over. It's not very exciting, and it just makes me wonder why this was the only option you got. The Cybernetic Enhancements are a natural inclusion for this game. It is a cyberpunk game after all. You can upgrade guns, and on top of that, your clothes and your own body. Nearly every organ in your body can be upgraded, and really the most interesting part of this feature is the menu system. It just looks cool. Except for the double jump, which completely breaks the game. The guns, again, also have little to offer. You can get the upgrades mentioned earlier, but this game would have been much better off ditching the RPG gun system entirely and adopting a more dedicated upgrade system much like the organs. Instead of picking up a new gun every time you kill an enemy, you could just save up money from looting enemies and buy one from the store. Then that gun could be upgraded to do something like shoot bullets with electric rounds that disable enemy cybernetics, or maybe they're super effective against robots. The third thing with a pointless upgrade system is the clothing. You'll be picking up a ridiculous military helmet, tank top, snow boots, or oversized glasses more quickly than you'll pick up a new gun. Then that clothing option will be just a little bit better than the one you have now, and in just a few minutes you'll find a new one that's better than that. So I ended up not finding any real reason to put upgrades on any of my clothing options until near the end of the game. At that point, I was comfortable with the armor I had, knowing that I wouldn't really find a real upgrade that was going to make a big difference for a long time. So the upgrades finally became relevant. Another thing that really bothered me about the clothing system was a trailer that CD Projekt Red released that emphasized how important style was to all the citizens in the city. The corpos, nomads, and the street kids all have distinct fashion sense, and they all have their reasons, and you, V, get to choose one of those factions to live as, and it would only make sense if V also had the same fashion sense as those cultures. But then, the only fashion you get to pick from are clothes that are found on the streets, or clothes that are sold by vendors, and you really have very little to pick from. It's sort of a shame. It just doesn't make sense why CD Projekt Red would make a game that so emphasizes fashion, then gives you so little to pick from. It's even more confusing compared to GTA and Saints Row the Third, where your clothing options are so near limitless that you can pick any style you could think of. You can dress your character to be cool if you'd like, or you could go on the complete other end of the spectrum and make them downright ridiculous. The point is that you do end up having the option. In this game, all of the interesting clothing options are just placed on NPCs with no way for you, the player, to actually get them. Furthermore, the emphasis on the clothing really makes me wonder why this game was in first person. If it's so important to look and feel cool, then why do I not get to see my character? Why don't I, the player, get to relate to the character that I'm playing as? If I was able to see my player in third person, and even then shoot in third person, it would actually fix two issues. First, I could see the clothing options. Second, the emphasis on gunplay would be reduced. The game would take emphasis off of accuracy and precision and then place it instead into decision making, while also allowing the player to see a larger area to make those decisions. Even driving would have been benefited from a third-person perspective. It's almost as if 30 years of game design have been ignored, and for some reason CD Projekt Red decided that first-person would be the best camera angle to drive a car in. Just ignore peripheral vision and field of view and just make that turn. Just trust that the road is there. And let's talk about the driving more. This game's driving is just downright awful. Trying to make a turn, even at low speeds, will just end up with you spinning out. It's one of the worst driving controls I've ever had to use. There is a silver lining though. There are just a couple of cars in the game that do control well. But by control well, I mean you can actually make a turn. So take that for what it is. Retrieving new cars is also confusing to me. You can't just steal a car off the streets and add it to your garage, much like every other GTA clone that's ever existed. So if you want a new car, you're gonna have to go buy it like an upright citizen. But you're a mercenary. You are definitely not above stealing a car. And on top of this, there are flying vehicles in the sky above the city, and you never have the opportunity to drive one. If any open-world city explorer game with driving should have flying cars, Cyberpunk 2077 is that game. Instead, Cyberpunk 2077 does not have flying cars when it should, and Saints Row the Third gets flying cars just for the hell of it, and it's not even a Cyberpunk game. Low-key, Cyberpunk 2077 just wishes it was a Saints Row the Third clone. You explore an open-world city, kill members of rival gangs, complete side missions to raise your street cred, and there's even a dildo baseball bat. This game would have actually been better if it would have copied more of Saints Row the Third, but oh well. Moving on, the hacking in this game is neat. It's nothing special. To sell the illusion of you doing a quick hack, the game has to go into slow motion, and the feeling of you being this hacking wizard that disables cameras and short circuits enemies on the fly is just completely lost. You end up just being slow, and it would have been faster for you to have just get seen by an enemy and then hit them with a hammer. The quick hacking is most useful to turn off cameras and turrets and then remain in stealth, but the stealth is slow and it could easily turn a 20-hour main experience into 30 hours or more. This game gives you many options on how to play, and the way you decide to play is just a personal preference, so while I might think that the stealth is boring, you might end up enjoying it. And the same thing can be said about the skill trees. You can put all your skill points into whatever you want. You can choose stealth, melee, gunplay, or quick hacking. And if you choose to play mostly quick hacking, you can put all your stats into quick hacks and become this cyber god and kill enemies so quickly, even on the hardest difficulty. Overall, I really wasn't impressed by the skill tree at all, but to each his own. The most confusing part about it is that you don't end up getting enough skill points to upgrade every stat. I would have loved to have been able to get to max level on each stat if I put in the time. Cyberpunk 2077 suffers from the same problem as many other open world style games. There is some imminent danger, and if the character doesn't act quick enough, then the whole world is going to end. But then you, the player, spend the next 30 hours doing side content. This happened to me in Breath of the Wild, where Calamity Ganon was growing in power, and if Link doesn't act fast, then Ganon is going to destroy Hyrule. But then I just spent 50 hours riding horses and looking for Korok seeds. It ends up causing a huge disconnect from the presented time-sensitive narrative and the actions that the player is encouraged to make. In 2077, V, your character, is going to die soon unless he can get medical help. But I ended up deciding to find every one of the runaway taxi cars so that I could end up making friends with a robot. This is just a common problem seen in many open-world games, and I recognize it occurs in other games too, but I consider it to be a flaw in open-world games more severely, just because open-world games are the only genre structured to allow the player to wander around the map and enjoy over 50 hours of content just about any time. The only game that I think ever really handled time-sensitive emergencies was Majora's Mask. You, the player, can feel the urgency that the character feels. The timer at the bottom of the screen and the dunk-dunk at the dawn of every day really drills it home. You connect with Link in this way. He has 3 days to save the world, and so do you. You get to feel that time limit through the gameplay. And the point of this is that connection between the player's emotions and the character's emotions is absent in 2077. I consider Cyberpunk 2077 to be a severely underwhelming open-world video game that ignores well-known aspects of game design and doesn't even try to experiment with any risky or new gameplay ideas. It's just a generic shooter with driving and hacking. None of the gameplay is really better than a 7 out of 10 at its best. But the reason Cyberpunk 2077 really deserves to be talked about is its story and themes. I swear they're so good. Finally, something I actually like this game for. I'm seriously so excited. 2077 is a piece of Cyberpunk media, and as you may know, Cyberpunk media is awesome. Just the name was one of the first reasons that I was interested in this game in the first place. The Cyberpunk genre is an antidote of sorts to traditional sci-fi. There are shiny cars and robots, but Cyberpunk puts a dark twist on it. The world is dystopian, and the point is to show how technology could end up leading humans into a terrible future instead of a good one. In the case of 2077, the main technology is the Cybernetic Enhancements, and epitomized by what the game calls the Shard. This is a chip that contains the digital psyche of Johnny Silverhand, a known terrorist. And without spoiling the story at all, your character ends up slotting that shard into your head, and fusing their own memory with the mind of Johnny Silverhand. Cyberpunk 2077 thrives in telling this story, and it earns its seat as a respectable piece of cyberpunk media. The characters, the writing, the acting are all great. Keanu Reeves' performance as Johnny Silverhand really stands out in video game acting. It's just a real shame that this story and these performances are all slapped into a video game. There's nothing about the story that was enhanced by the gameplay. The visuals, the narrative, all drove the gameplay instead of the gameplay driving the narrative. You, the player, are at the whim of the game, doing tasks set before you simply because that's what the character must do to move on. And it ends up not being any different than watching a movie, but pressing buttons. And I would have likely preferred if this game was just a movie or short series. I think it would have ended up being near flawless. This main story will take you about 20 hours to complete, but if that's all you do, you're going to miss out on a huge chunk of what adds to the game. The side characters and their stories are probably better than the main content. And if you do play this game, you definitely need to finish the quests for Brendan the Vending Machine, Judy, River Ward, and Delamine. The overall final mission of the game really stands out as the best part. There are 4 different endings, and this will be spoiler-free, available depending on what side content you complete, and they all give the player the option to choose their own fate as they ask themselves deep questions, like, what is human life, and what's worth living for? Again, without spoiling anything, this narrative plays with the ideas of artificial intelligence and human life. Different characters live and die, and you're led to question how dead and alive they really are. This is what makes Cyberpunk 2077 so good. This is its claim to fame. This is the reason to play this game. Just as other Cyberpunk media would have you do, you have to think about what this game puts in front of you. In the Blade Runner movies, Blade Runner and Blade Runner 2049, they show you Decker, played by Harrison Ford. And those movies make you question, is Decker a human or is he a replicant? And by the end of 2049, that question is still left unanswered. And that's the point. You're supposed to watch these movies and ask, what makes someone a human? And how far does technology have to advance before it imitates humans so perfectly that it even imitates us on an emotional level? At what point does technology become alive? Those same sorts of questions are asked in Cyberpunk 2077. When would you consider V dead? Is Johnny Silverhand alive? Is it okay for somebody to extend their own life by using a computer chip? And if that is okay, then is it still okay if in order to do so you would have to kill another person and invade their body? And if that was wrong, would it then be made right if they gave you consent? And these are all questions that the game does not have to answer, and you aren't really supposed to learn anything from Cyberpunk 2077. You're just meant to question, and it all comes together at this final moment that just so perfectly wraps up what a video game can do, tying together personal choice with intense questioning. You get to decide what you think is right. You get to pick your fate for real. Kind of. It's a video game after all. But you get to see the life of this character based on the decisions that you might make if you were in that situation. And because of this story, Cyberpunk 2077 makes up for its underwhelming gameplay and the circumstances surrounding its release. In short, should you play Cyberpunk? Probably not. You could just watch someone else play it and have the same amount of fun.